Previously on the Big Trade series.
The financial markets just collapsed, and I've been looking forward to speaking to you about strategy.
And I specialize in strategic planning, leadership development, advanced analysis, and organizational culture.
No one in Vietnam has managed to utilize the internet to the extent that I have, and I always thought that that was very compelling.
Back in 2012, Business Finance magazine published an article on spotting bad strategies within businesses, and the number one was failure to get a good external look at your business.
Without further ado, we're pleased to present the next installment of this conversation. You are now listening to The Big Trade with Peter Pham, enlightening conversations for maximum market returns.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone listening, and I'd love to be able to, if we get a chance, I hope that you can share this message to your audience as well, because I know obviously there's a lot of people that are interested in something like this, but I think you have to really sit down and talk to that fund manager, and I know many people don't get the opportunity to, and they're going to, impress you with all this Wall Street jargon. But, how much of that actually reaches the essence, And I think one of the great strategies people talk about is all the red herrings, right? All the noise that is created. And I'm a big fan of Robert Greene, and I study people for their actions as opposed to all the noise. Or, if they're communicating what is actually really happening and able to produce action off of it, and that's one of the things that's missing when you watch CNBC or Bloomberg. All you hear these talking heads just going on and on about it, but how much of that is really going to get you the optimal investment decision, and I think very little of it does. I don't even watch any of these forms of media. I have a select amount of media that I read, and I actually spend more time trying to produce media than actually watching and absorbing media, especially finance related, because first and foremost, it makes you a better analyst, number one. Number two is that when you are able to implement the scientific method and a quantitative approach to analyzing things, it basically the decision making mechanism involved boils down to it's almost a very binary. And it's focused on other permutations and statistics and probabilities, but you don't need to be caught up by the noise, and emotion almost comes out of that equation. The only time I get emotional,
Yes.
Tom, is that when you're investing a few million into a particular position at that very moment, because you recognize the fiduciary responsibility that you have for your investor. But does it take away anything from the decision making? No.
No, ultimately you have to make a decision, and whether you're doing it with investing, whether you're doing it with a national security decision,
right.
Whether you're doing it with a home decision on your family, am I going to buy this car or move to this new state? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, you have to make a decision. You have to say, but what are you going to do? Okay, in the end, like you said, it comes down to the binary. Now, all that background is really, really important, okay? But it comes down to, in the end, what are you going to do? And somebody has to make a decision, okay? And that's the role of the CEO, ultimately, is
right.
to make a decision.
Sometimes the best decisions, by the way, Tom, is not doing anything at all. Sometimes is the best decision, too, which people don't talk about often.
Well, it's interesting. I've often said that no decision is a decision to do nothing.
Yep.
And it actually is a decision, but you're deciding not to do anything.
Yep.
And that may be the safest thing to do, but you have to know why you're doing that, okay? It can't be because I can't decide, okay? Yep. I think that if you're going to do nothing, it has to be because that is the right decision. And,
that's interesting.
It very often is the right decision to do. Mm-hmm. Okay, look at what's happening for the last several years, Belgium's had this real problem within their government. They can't find amity between the Flemings and the Walloons, and so they can't, just get their act together within the national government. And the people are saying it's gone on long enough where actually, if you do something right now, it might upset the balance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And people are just happy. Okay? You've not done any harm. And sometimes doing something may do more harm.
Yeah.
But what I'm always about is to say, if you're going to do nothing, make sure that it's a deliberate choice to do nothing, and not just because you can't decide.
You don't want to be the deer stuck in the headlights, correct?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I'll go back to a military example. I went to Baghdad in 2004, late 2004, and the Western world that essentially went to 43 countries or whatever that formed a coalition to go invade Iraq in March of 2003 signed the campaign plan in August of 2004. Okay? So 18 months after the commencement of operations, they signed the strategy. Okay?
What?
Not 6 months before, not a year before. Okay? But honestly, that happens in businesses, and I bet you that you can think about 3 of them right off the top of your head right now.
Yep.
Where people are doing things without having thought through and saying, here's what I want to achieve, here's what I have to achieve it with, now I have to sit down and come up with a course of action to achieve that.
Yep.
Okay?
I know you know this because you do a lot of consulting and you're going to run into clients. I see this more so in terms of from an Asian mentality, once again, limited resources mentality. You'll say, hey, I'm Tom Ruby. I understand about strategy. I can help you with your business. And there will be businesses that will just say, no, thank you, Tom. We'll do this internally. And the funny thing is that they don't have a Tom Ruby internally for them to do the things that they do. And they'd rather be frugal about it and affect their whole business trajectory than to hire Tom Ruby, which is actually considered a very minimal investment to do as relative to the size and scope of the project, which is hilarious to me.
I had somebody tell me once, I'm going to go under. I can't afford to hire you because I'm going to go under in 6 months.
Right.
And what about taking 2 months of that money that you have and putting it towards not going under ever?
Right.
Okay? And getting out from under going under. And the answer was, yeah, I'm just not comfortable with that. And I said, so what you're going to do is accept you're saying right now, I'm willing to go under. No, I don't want to go under is what they said. I said, how badly do you not want to go under?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go under badly enough to pay somebody to help you not go under? And the truth of the matter is everybody wants it for free.
Yep.
I can tell you that in my experience, I've seen lots of leaders who want to ask deeper questions. Okay, are we doing what we should do? How well are we doing it? But in many cases, they're really concerned that their key subordinates are going to come out and say, we don't need a consultant. And I've seen that. Oh, crap, Bob, we're experts at this. We don't need anybody to tell us what to do. And in many cases, these leaders know themselves that when they bring somebody else in, they're going to have to actually look in the mirror and make a decision, am I going to do this or not?
Right.
Okay, and then they have to say, on one hand, if I do what this guy is recommending, then is that going to make me look like I've been doing things wrong in the past? But then if I don't do it, somebody's going to say, well, why have I paid for this guy?
Right.
All right? And so they just say, I'm just not going to do it. And it takes a really strong and wise leader and to have chemistry with the consultant to be, I think the word is brave, to be brave and to say, yeah, I really need this. And if you look at all of the evidence from all the business schools, all the actual, data that's been put out there, consultants more than pay for themselves just by giving you an outside look, and coming in, they can instantly tell what the issues are within any organization.
So, Tom, how do you distinguish yourself opposed to, I mean, this is a strategic conversation now. How do you distinguish yourself as opposed to, say, your rivals?
Honestly, I don't try to worry about my rivals. Okay.
Okay.
I don't, and I say that because generally the really, really big companies, they go after the really, really big firms. And it's not because I'm going to be very careful on how I say this. I don't think it's because they think that they're going to get a superior product. Okay. I think that in a lot of cases, the big businesses go after the really big firms so that they can show their customers a level of commitment in how much they spend for a particular service.
Right.
Okay, if I can tell my customers I spent X amount of money on a strategic plan, like in the really, really high figures, and their clients are going to think that, man, these guys really have their act together.
Right.
Whereas if somebody else says, well, I got a superior product, but I paid a tenth of that, people are going to say, well, I frankly find it hard to believe that you'd find a superior product for a tenth of the price.
Right.
Okay. And what I try to do is I explain to my clients that, I'm really not out there. I spend my time getting them to where they want to be, not comparing myself to how much I'm, not looking at other people, because when I do that, I'm not working for them.
Right.
I'm not spending, if you hired me, Peter, you wouldn't want me spending my billable hours or my billable for, let's say, a firm fixed price project, looking at what the other big consulting firms are doing. You want my nose into the books and doing research. And that's what I do. Just like you, okay? I mean, if I'm going to hire you as my asset manager, what I don't need from you is to tell me how much I'd be paying if I went to another place.
Right.
I guess that's my way of saying I try to avoid that issue by, if you're really coming to me and made that decision that you're going to come to me, we really don't need to be talking about what somebody else could or couldn't be giving you.
So, Tom, switching subjects, I think it was like about a year ago. I'm a little behind the curve on this, even more so than you. But so I'm sitting there about a year ago. I'm looking at my movie collection, and I pop in this movie called Ender's Game.
Yes.
I thought, wow, that's probably like another, one of those other teen movies that everyone's watching about, so it can't be that spectacular. So
No way.
press play, and I watch this movie, and I realize how brilliant it is. Probably not as good as the book. I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but
not anywhere near as good as the book.
yes, I'm sure. So, Tom, I know you're very fascinated by Ender's Game, and I think you have a relationship with the author, if I'm not mistaken. Can you discuss a little bit about this? And it'd be great to actually have him on talking about some of his thoughts and ideas about Ender's Game as well.
Orson Scott Card wrote a novella titled Ender's Game for a magazine in, I think it was 1983. It might have been 1985. Okay. And he expanded that into a book. And what's been very interesting is that I had people recommending that book to me for years.
Right.
And years. People recommending that book to me for years, and I would always say, listen, I don't have time for that, okay? I just don't have time for sci-fi. And when I finally read the book, it was a professor of mine at the University of Kentucky when I was getting my doctorate said, like, he almost apologetically, like pathetically said to me, you haven't read Ender's Game? And he wasn't, like, putting me down. It was almost like a pathetic thing. He said, you haven't read it? And I said, okay, I got to go get this book. And I was just, it was like a gut punch. I was just, I can't believe that I haven't read something like this. And I realized this isn't a science fiction book. This is a book about morality and sociology. And science fiction is just a medium to ask you questions and to ask you questions about how far can or should society go when the entire human race is threatened with extinction. What's appropriate? And there's no global answer for that. You have to, the beauty of that is that you have to answer that question yourself. When my daughter, I have 3 daughters and a son. When my 3rd daughter read that book, we were living in Dayton, Ohio, and it was probably early 2012. She comes like 11:30 one night. She comes running down the hallway yelling, no way, Dad, you never told me that this was going to happen." Wakes me up, and I'm like, "Honey, that's awesome. Now go back to bed." Because she got it, okay? She was stunned. She was stunned by how it ended. Most people are. But the beauty of that book is that it makes you think on so many different levels, okay? You have to think about the individual persons. This is an excellent example of where the equation comes into play, okay? And so many of them are really fuzzy, non-hard science variables, okay? They're not something that you can measure. How do you measure Ender's ability to, his attentiveness level? That's one of the variables. Now you put a value to that, whether or not, how many times has he been put in the simulator that day? Okay, you have the mix of people, of his subordinates doing their jobs. Okay, and each of them in a different job is going to have a different value to their own variable. Okay, based upon how much sleep they've been under, or how much stress they're under, how much sleep they've gotten. Bean is trying to cover for Ender. It's absolutely fascinating to see how that equation changes as it goes along. As he gets more information, as he's trying to figure things out, as he's now taking morality into the equation. And if you want to bring that back to trading, you were talking about moral hazard a little while ago, and people claiming moral hazard. I think a lot of people don't have a problem with claiming moral hazard when they're on the winning side. Okay, but when they're on the losing side, they want to claim moral hazard, and that somebody should be looking out for them.
Right.
Okay.
That's a little bit crony capitalism, though. But go on.
It is, and have to do with Ender. He took the world as it was, not how he wanted it to be. Okay, he didn't sit and waste time trying to figure out, okay, crap, this is really unfair, and then sit and mope. He said, okay, they're not going to tell me this. I can't sit and waste time figuring out why. I'm just going to go on with what I know. Okay, and you as an investor, you have to make a decision, right? Okay, I don't think that I have all of the information. Do I want to take the time to go get more information that may or may not make my decision any more accurate? Or do I want to make it now? And that gets back to what I was saying earlier with your binary. It all comes down to making a decision, yes or no. And when I'm doing analysis, it all comes down to, I can give the boss or the CEO that I'm working for, or the president, okay, all the information that I have, but at some point, he or she has to make a decision. Okay? And if you just keep saying, well, it's not good enough, I want to have more information, well, then you'll never actually make a decision.
So, Tom, in terms of Ender, what is it that, besides what you just described, were there tactics or strategies that he implemented that were very compelling to you?
He was not bound by a set of customs and ordinary rules. Okay? He was told very early on, and he was taught very early on, that there's not going to be somebody to protect you when you're out there in space. Okay? And that's very compelling. If you think about the early pioneers that went out west in both Canada and the United States. Okay, there wasn't anybody out there to protect them. Okay, so they had to make decisions on their own for what to do. Okay, do I shoot or do I not? How many bullets do I take, and what do I do? And during the movie, if you remember, Mazer Rackham told him, "There's nobody going to be there to protect you," and they tried to teach him that. Okay, but by teaching him that, they also had to put him in essentially very dangerous and grave dangerous situations, because if they did, let's say when he was being threatened to be killed, by Bonzo, and they were watching it, his superiors were watching this, had they stepped in and saved him, they were thinking that he would have come to expect to be saved in the future, right? And when you're fighting out in space, or when you're fighting for your survival, you can't expect somebody to come save you. So it was he learned his lessons very quickly and was able to apply them very, very quickly. And that makes a really good thinker. Okay, somebody that can take a lesson that he learned in one place and apply it to something else in a different place is a really good thinker. Okay, and that's the kind of person that you want to surround yourself with. Okay, is somebody that can take lessons from books that he's read in the past or experiences, and not just say, well, I've done this before, but to say, well, how is what I've done in this situation relatable to what I'm doing now in this situation?
Right. Isn't that the direction of society, Tom? In which I noticed that individuals that are succeeding and doing well in all different fields are showing multidisciplinary skills in whatever field that they are in now.
Yes. And I mean, if you look at, for example, Princeton University has the Institute for Advanced Studies.
Right.
Okay. And what do? They bring together the top people from all fields. Okay. So physicists, chemists, mathematicians, social scientists, economists, psychologists, all to work together on any topics. Okay. And what you'll get, though, is in many businesses, all right, and in many organizations, people that will say, well, what do I have to do? What do I have to do to learn from that guy? That has nothing to do with me. And what I say is, if you can't find something to learn from somebody in some disparate field, then you shouldn't be leading any kind of organization.
Wow.
Okay, and I really mean that. I mean, you have to be able to take into account different kinds of thought processes and always try to figure out, how does that apply to me here?
Right.
If I'm doing intelligence analysis for the government, okay, and and I've read that diversity always makes for better decisions, then I need to bring in people that have different backgrounds and that have different experiences, not just people, that have all worked on the same project.
I've heard a fascinating quote from professor that wrote a book called Mindset Psychology, which focuses on a mindset of growth as opposed to kind of like determination, like basically I'm smart or I'm not smart, or basically society seems to reward people in that mindset of just coming up with conclusions on an individual rather than encouraging their growth. And the individual, that professor, she says, for all you students that are coming here to Stanford to become like really smart, you can forget about it. You can't win in that game, because obviously there's always going to be people that much more, say, academically smarter than you.
Amen.
But the purpose of you going there is for you to acquire all the skill sets for you to take out into your own life and implement. And I thought that was a very brilliant quote in terms of how to perceive what you're trying to do.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I completely agree with that. I've seen people that are just absolutely off the chart genius that can't figure their way out through a job.
Right.
Okay. And yet, I think one of the people that taught me more than anything else in 30 years in uniform was a boss of mine that told me that he got to where he was with a very simple strategy. Always try to hire people that were smarter than him.
Right.
Do you know how hard that is for people to do in leadership positions?
Right.
To have the guts to hire somebody that they think is smarter than them, to have the confidence to do that, because most don't have the confidence to have somebody that they think is smarter than them working for them, because they're always going to be looking over their shoulder, always going to be needing to put that person down. But this guy got to, listen, he's no dummy, okay? He's a really smart guy himself. He got to very elite levels in academia, PhD, and a colonel in the Air Force, okay? But he very selectively went out and hired people, and he says the best way to make yourself look good is to have really smart, good people working for you, and then to let them go.
Yeah.
And so, one of my rules is always, one of the things that I look for in good bosses is never make sure that your people never have to ask permission to do their job. And if your people are constantly having to ask permission to do their job, then why do you even have them in that job? Why don't you just do it yourself? Okay? And that's a good boss. Okay? Telling people, don't call me up at night for a decision that's your decision. Okay? Own it. Okay? I'll support you in the decisions that you make, and if you're not making a good decision, then I need to see whether or not I've either trained you to do it right, whether I've equipped you with the resources to do it right, okay, or whether only in the third case will I consider that you didn't do it because you couldn't.
So Tom, there is one subject I've been hinting on it that I'd love to discuss with you about. I would be disappointed if we didn't cover it. I'd love to discuss about strategists. One of my favorite books is actually The Art of War, but there's many, right? So I'd love to talk about some great strategists and some great lessons that you might have taken away.
Listen, Sun Tzu is on my reading list. Okay, Clausewitz is on my reading list.
Right.
They both. Clausewitz talked about the process of strategy.
Right.
Okay. Clausewitz talked about the process of strategy of connecting the ends to your means. So the strategy is to do that.
Right.
And he talked about the placement of, like, for example, you can't have a strategy unless you have a policy to follow. Okay. So strategy necessarily has to be subordinate to policy. Okay. And so I really like that. It's a very structured approach for people who need structure. Okay. And I think that strategy is a very structured art. I'm going to throw out Lewis and Clark at you.
Okay.
Stephen Ambrose's work called Undaunted Courage, and it's subtitled Meriwether Lewis, Thomas Jefferson, and the Opening of the American West. And Ambrose details the thought process behind which Lewis and Clark took the means that they had to discover, the western boundary of the continent. Okay, and the detail with which they did that, to the degree to where they planned out, how many lead bullets that they were going to need. Okay, and now can we take all those bullets? how can we do this? They were brilliant enough to devise. They built lead pots, okay, and those lead pots held powder, gunpowder. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And as they used the gunpowder and had a lead pot left, they would melt that lead pot down and pour it into molds to make bullets out of.
Right.
And they strategically buried caches along the way so that they wouldn't have to carry everything across the continent and then back again.
Right.
And the level of thought that it took to get through that, they do that very, very detailed strategic planning process that you in the finance world would consider due diligence.
Right.
And that I would consider assumptions and validation of assumptions.
Mm.
So, if it doesn't matter what field you're in. If you read about, Lewis and Clark and their journey across the country, the level of thinking and strategy that they had to put in was just really tremendous.
Yeah. What about Machiavelli? What are your thoughts on The Prince?
I think Machiavelli used. It wasn't so much a strategy for him as an end that he was up against, and it was, what can I do? So he was looking at what strategies can I use to keep my base of power. So
right.
he had a strategic end or a political end that he was trying to achieve, which is maintaining power, and whatever strategy I could use was to pit people against each other, to use methods that other people thought were unseemly at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of reminds me of, pre-World War I, when you had the British diplomat saying, "Gentlemen do not read other gentlemen's mail."
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Well, that was anti-Machiavellian. Okay? Machiavelli was driven by his end, by his desire to remain in, but not by his, but the prince's need to remain in power and to do whatever you could do to weaken those that might take the power from you.
Right.
So his strategy was just to weaken the others, not necessarily for himself to gain something else.
Mm. Do you think that approach has any merit in this day and age as well?
I absolutely think so. If you look at how some countries maintain power bases,
Yep.
okay, you weaken anybody, you jail anybody that can come into to a position of power to threaten you in any way. If you look at how countries act towards each other today it's an all but declared cyber war against each other.
Right.
All they're doing is trying to maintain their relative position vis-a-vis somebody else, not necessarily by overtly doing something to somebody, but by keeping somebody from doing something to you.
Right. Tom, going back to what you're referring to in terms of like the way that you approach business, though, you had indicated that, you're preoccupied with your own efforts as opposed to thinking about or even entertaining potential competition for, say, a particular proposal. How do those two ideas jive with each other from this context?
Interesting question. I guess that in my markets, I present an option to my potential business partners that I'm looking out for myself, but I'm going to give you a better product than somebody else would at a much lower price.
Mm.
The people that I'm maybe competing against may look at me as a gnat, flying around. That's not worthy of their time. But I guess maybe there's going to come a time where I'm going to really have to consider the really bigger players. The people that I'm dealing with at this level maybe can't afford the really, really big, international level consulting firms. And maybe they want something that I'm going to be able to give them that's going to be, not a binder with just the name changed from the last person that they gave it to.
Right.
That's going to be able to give them something very personalized.
Tom, another thing I've noticed is that many of the good strategy books actually encourage elements of guerrilla warfare. And that precedes the conduct of war, which was considered much more gentlemanly, right? Where, you would meet at a particular field at a prearranged location and you would fight in a particular structure. Why is it that all the strategy books indicated something else, and then the conduct of war didn't change until much after that?
It wasn't always that way. I mean, even up until World War II, even into Desert Storm, I mean, we fought in large sense in the old ways. Two sides lined to beat the crap out of each other. But as Napoleon fought some of his foes in line battle, but he never took over Spain. And why was that? Because the Spaniards fought a guerrilla war against him, and he was never able to defeat that.
Right.
Now, as far as strategy books go today, I think a lot of that has to do with kind of like, you were talking about earlier, what you hear on Bloomberg and MSNBC. It's a lot of people just talking. And to me, I don't advocate guerrilla warfare. I take morality into account as a variable in the equation whenever I deal with a client.
Right.
And I want to know whether or not my, business partner, has where he stands or she stands on their moral compass.
Right.
Because to some people, that's a very important variable to play. And not all the business books. I mean, if you, there's a very small book called The Business Card about a company called Polydeck that essentially has the global market on screens that filter out mining materials, that are gotten out of the earth. And the owner, came to a point it came to a decision point in his life where he said, I've got to have a really moral business model. And he put something religious on the back of his business card, and he told his businessmen that we're going to use this. And his businessmen said, you're going to hurt us by doing this because our commissions are going to drop because people are going to take their business away from us. And he guaranteed his businessmen their money from any business that they lost because of it. And the truth test of it came when he went into the Middle East, which might have been hostile to what was written on the back of his business card, and he gained an entire country's operations.
Wow.
That had been given out in pieces to other companies.
Right. Yeah, I'm almost of the view on that subject that you were just saying is I'm almost of the view that as long as you're in the practice of true and actual value creation in terms of business and interacting with clients and even in relationships overall, that's the long-term way to go. But I'm also a big reader of all of these strategy books. One of the ones that has always interested me is what the Chinese are reading called Unrestricted Warfare, which encourages like lawfare, economic warfare, network warfare, terrorism. Just thinking how brilliant that is. But thinking about that maybe from almost like, it sounds like a fantastic marketing campaign almost, basically. But it's very interesting.
Well, is unrestricted warfare going to be something that you can do for the very long term? Or is it something that's only a short term? And they have to make that decision. I agree with you that if you want long-term relationships, and right. Personally, that's what I want in my business, okay? Yeah. Sure, I will take the one-off, speaking gigs, to come in and do a business gathering presentation. But what I'm looking for in my business is long-term relationships that start as business relationships right. and into friendships.
Yep.
And those almost all require some level of agreement on moral decision-making.
Right. Fascinating. Well, Tom, it's been almost like quite a conversation. I think we should end it from there. Maybe we could just end this by you providing maybe some interesting strategy tidbit for the audience.
Strategy tidbit. Think about classical economics theory, okay?
Okay.
We have scarcity of resources, all right? A good strategist is going to think about how to maximize scarce resources in a particular order so that they build on themselves to create something that's greater than the sum of the parts. Does that make sense?
Love it.
So
if
I have scarce resources, if I field them in a particular order, I may actually be able to get synergies between them at particular timing points that's going to create something that's going to achieve an end that otherwise you wouldn't have ever thought could be achieved with just the sum of the parts.
That's amazing. I mean, I feel like we're running our operation from that perspective as well. And that's why I can relate to it so much. And all of these small mini victories, you have no idea, Tom, how fulfilling it is just to be able to implement and execute with limited resources and being able to execute on one of those aspects that a target or an objective is just a massive win. And people don't think about these profoundly, but it's almost sometimes a massive win for the person that you are and for the location that you're based at. So I love that. I don't know, you were going to say something else. Please continue.
I was going to say that's, one of my maxims is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And you have to think about what bite you're going to take next. So if you're doing that, then your company is just going to be doing great.
On that note, thank you very much, Tom. Next time we should continue this conversation as well, and I hope the audience has appreciated this, the time that you spent with us.
I hope so too. They can come, I'm sure they can find me through you, or they can find me through my own website at bgcts.com. That's Bluegrass Critical Thinking Solutions. And I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook as well.
We hope you enjoyed this mastermind session. If you'd like to contact Peter Pham or Phoenix Capital, please email info@phx-cap.com.